UFC matchmaker for a day. If I was UFC matchmaker for a day, these are all of the fights that I would make. Number one, Francis Ngannou, the champion, versus the winner of Stipe Miocic versus John Jones. We got Cyril Gane versus Tai Tuivasa. That's already set. Stipe versus John Jones for the interim title. Tuivasa Gane. Curtis Blades versus the winner of Cyril Gane versus Tai Tuivasa. The winner of this matchup right here, for example, Curtis Blades, Tai Tuivasa, or Curtis Blades versus Cyril Gane, gets the title shot after Stipe and John Jones. We got Sergey Pavlovich versus the loser of Cyril Gane and Tai Tuivasa. Tom Aspinall versus the loser of Stipe Miocic versus John Jones. Derek Lewis versus Alexander Volkov. Jairzinho Rosenstruck versus Sergey Spivak. We got Chris Daukaus versus Jailton Almeida if he can beat Shamil Abdurrahimov. We got Alexander Romanov, Marcin Tybura. Sergey Spivak, Jairzinho, already said that one. Already said this one as well. Jailton Almeida, Shamil Abdurrahimov, and Blago Ivanov and Juan Espino. That is the heavyweight division matchmaking right there. Light heavyweight, we got Yuri Prochazka, champion, versus Glover Teixeira. We got Glover versus Yuri. Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev. Alexander Rakic versus Jamal Hill. Anthony Smith versus Dominic Reyes. We already said this one. Volkan Oezdemir versus Nikita Krylov. Thiago Santos versus Dustin Jacoby. Paul Craig versus Ryan Spann. Already said it. Johnny Walker versus Iwan Kutalaba. Already said it. And Jimmy Cruz versus Nicole Negumereanu. Those are the light heavyweight division fights to make next. Next is middleweight. Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. Robert Whittaker, Marvin Vettori, Jared Cannonier, and Sean Strickland. Already said this one. Derek Brunson, Andre Muniz, 5-round main event of a fight night. Pereira Adesanya. Costa versus Luke Rockholds. Sean Strickland, Jared Cannonier. We reset the fight with Jack Hermanson and Darren Till. Finally make it happen. Andre Muniz versus Brunson. Kelvin Gastelum versus Dricus du Plessis. Uriah Hall, retiring from the MMA or from the UFC. Nasruddin Imavov versus Joaquin Buckley. Du Plessis versus Gastelum. And you might be wondering what this one means. Brad Tavares versus the winner of Bruno Silva versus Gerald Meerschaert. The winner of that fight fights Chris Curtis on the main card of a pay-per-view. And then the winner of that one fights Brad Tavares. Then we go on to the welterweight division. Usman versus Edwards. Colby Covington versus the loser of Usman versus Edwards. Only if that loser is Leon Edwards. Because if the loser is Usman, they're going to probably do the trilogy, and Colby's probably going to fight Hamzat or something like that. Edwards versus Usman, obviously. Hamzat versus the winner of Usman versus Edwards. Again, if that winner is Usman. Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Gamebred Masvidal. Bilal Muhammad versus Sean Brady. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Michel Pereira. Sean Brady versus Bilal Muhammad. Jeff Neal versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. Jorge Masvidal versus Gilbert Burns. Vicente Luque versus Li Jingliang. We already said this one. Chiesa versus Kevin Holland. Neil Magny versus Daniel Rodriguez. Already said that one, and we already said that one. Then for the lightweight division, Charles Oliveira and Islam Makhachev, Dustin Poirier and Michael Chandler, Justin Gaethje and Rafael Fiziev. Already said it. Benil Dariush versus Mateusz Gamrot, already said it. Rafael dos Anjos versus Arman Tsarukyan. That's going to be a very solid fight. Gamrot versus Benil Dariush. Tony Ferguson versus Dan Hooker. And the winner of Tony Ferguson versus Dan Hooker is going to be fighting Conor the Notorious McGregor. Jalen Turner versus the loser of Rafael dos Anjos and Arman Tsarukyan. Damiris Magula versus the loser of Dariush versus Gamrot. Or, if Gregor Gillespie comes back, we'll substitute him in there instead. But this is what we have right now. I don't know if Gregor's going to come back or not. Then, for the featherweight division, Alexander Volkanovski, champion, versus the winner of Josh Emmett versus Yair Rodriguez for the interim featherweight belts. Max Holloway versus Arnold Allen. I really like that one. Yair versus Josh Emmett for the interim championship. Then we got, of course, Brian Ortega versus Movsar Evloev. We got Calvin Kattar versus either Arnold Allen or Yair Rodriguez, only if one of those guys loses their fight. If Arnold Allen loses to Max Holloway, we do Arnold Allen versus Calvin Kattar. If Yair Rodriguez loses to Josh Emmett, we do Yair Rodriguez versus Calvin Kattar, if you understand. Then we got Chan Sung Jung versus Bryce Mitchell. Giga Chikadze versus Sodiq Yusuf. We already said this one, Evloev versus Ortega. Danny Gay versus the winner of Ilia Topuria and Edson Barboza. Already said it. Ilia Topuria, Edson Barboza. Shane Burgos versus the loser of Sodiq Yusuf and Giga Chikadze. Spelled that one incorrectly. And then, last but not least, of course, Topuria versus Barboza. Then we go on a bantamweight. Sterling, the champion, versus TJ Dillashaw. Piotr Yan versus Sean O'Malley. TJ versus Aljo. Jose Aldo versus Merab Dvalishvili. Corey Sandhagen versus Song Yadong. Marlon Vera versus Dominic Cruz. Merab Dvalishvili and Jose Aldo. Rob Font versus Ricky Simone. Dominic Cruz versus Chito Vera. Pedro Munoz versus Umar Nurmagomedov. Already said this one. Already said it. Frankie Edgar versus Dominic Cruz. If Dominic Cruz loses to Marlon Chito Vera. Sean O'Malley versus Piotr Yan. Umar versus Munoz. And Jack Shore versus Saeed Nurmagomedov. That's what we got for the bantamweight division. For flyweight, we got Davis and Figueiredo, champion versus champion, of course, we all know. That fight is, of course, what's going to happen. Alexandre Pantoja versus the winner of Figueiredo versus Moreno. Just hope there's not a draw or something stupid. Kai Kara France versus the loser of Davis and Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno. Askar Askarov versus Brandon Royval. Alex Perez versus Amir Albazi if he wins his fight this weekend. That is the fight I think should happen. Mateus Nicolau versus Matt Schnell. David Dvorak versus Manel Kopp. I really like that one. Tim Elliott versus the loser of Matt Schnell and Mateus Nicolau. If that loser is going to be Matt Schnell, which I think it will be. Albazi versus Perez. You guys might like this one. Suma Derji versus the winner of course, Mohamed Mokayev and Malcolm Gordon. I think the winner is going to be, of course, Mohamed Mokayev, so we will do that one. Let's see. Manel Kopp versus David Dvorak. Jeff Molina versus the winner of Ode Osborne and Tyson Nam. And then last but not least, Tagir Ulanbekov versus the loser of Amir Albazi versus Alex Perez. If he wants to do something in the meantime, probably has to fight someone outside of the UFC rankings. But yeah, this is pretty much it. These are all the fights. I literally did 128 different matchups for the top 15 of every single division inside of the UFC. every male division inside the UFC. We did them all. And then, of course, we did this UFC Matchmaker slide right there. But, yeah, what do y'all think about all of these matchups right here? If you agree on some of them, if you disagree, whatever, put your thoughts down below in the comment section.